Okay. So I guess just off rip, I know from personal experience and obviously, people that you've worked with in the past that you've coached before know that you sort of deviate from the traditional uh, sort of endurance methodology that's heavily based around zone 2 training. But I was wondering if you could give us like a quick high level summary of what your training methodology is and how it differs from what you've seen other coaches do traditionally.
Yeah. It's at its core level, it is just high intensity training is more efficient at getting fast. And like the basic principle, if I had to sum it up in one sentence, is there's no point in going far if you can't go far fast. So, as I mostly coach triathletes, I coach swimmers, cyclists, runners as well, but the bulk of my athletes are in triathlon. Intensity endurance started as intensity triathlon. And it was just the concept of like, everyone thinks you got to beat yourself for 15, 20, 25 hours, your entire free time every week. And it's a lot easier to, maybe do 8 hours correct than it is to do 12 hours of just LT1 or zone 3 or zone 2 or whatever model you follow, like, mid aerobic training to get fit that you see like the Norwegian methods and stuff. And they do high intensity work, but this is extremely like like the foundation, if you're looking at a 7 zone model, is 5, 6, and 7. And that's the core philosophy of it. And there are a lot of pieces that build on top of that. But it's just quicker returns on getting faster. So that's the main philosophy. And this is kind of developed between, my coach and I in conjunction. And, I was used as the test subject almost of, I have 8 to 10 hours a week to train. I want to get my pro license in triathlon. Is that reasonable? And I think, I did very minimal tempo and threshold work, especially on the bike. The bike was mostly zone 5 or higher sprints. Occasionally I'd do a tempo threshold workout, but that was a lot of the run work. And so it works. And I mean, in the pool is all high intensity work. And, obviously I'm one person, everyone's different. So I also, when I coach individuals, it's a lot of, this is my method, but how do you respond to it? And overall, it's worked very, very well. And I think especially people that come to me after being with other coaches or being on their own for years, they see like just that change in process, it'll skyrocket performance, and it just, can't beat it.
Yeah. Athletes that actually come to you for coaching, have you ran into like some misconceptions that they have about maybe like programming structure, or obviously a lot of other coaches prioritize more of that zone 2 base? Are there any like common misconceptions that you run into when bringing in a new athlete?
It depends on, like, there haven't really been a lot of misconceptions because usually people come to me at just general curiosity. I think, I haven't put enough content out until recently to really say, this is what I coach with. Like, this is my philosophy. And especially if somebody comes to me mid-season and is like, I have a half Ironman in 4 months. I've been training. I'm a little lost. Help me out. And at that point, you're like, okay, well, I can't just, hammer you with VO2 and neuromuscular, because you do need endurance. And I know we can get into this a bit later, but, you can't neglect endurance, where my philosophy is ingrained in the speed is the base. Speed is not endurance. We are, as humans, endurance centered animals. Like, we have the best endurance on the planet, maybe with the exception of dogs. And so if you're naturally inclined to be, an endurance animal, why do you spend all of your time in base training focusing on that? Where, developing speed, and we can get into it later, but developing speed correctly, there's 5 steps to being good at endurance in, my philosophy. So developing that speed correctly is just everything. And so if we have the time, take off season, for example, if somebody has 20 hours to train over the off season, they're going to do zone 2 because, I can't fill 20 hours of, neuromuscular, anaerobic, and VO2 work.
Yeah, for sure.
But, if you have 20 hours to train, great. If you only have 8, all you're doing is that high intensity stuff and making sure you're fully recovered from it so you can execute it perfectly day on day. Hope that answers kind of the question, but that's just the general gist of what we're doing. So people don't really come with misconceptions, but they come with curiosity. And I think it definitely sparks a lot of interest, and it also sparks a lot of controversy.
Yeah. And I think we'll talk about, some of the controversial parts of that ideology later. But what I was wondering personally is how you arrived at this sort of methodology, this approach to your coaching. I know you mentioned earlier it was like sort of a joint effort between you and your coach to facilitate you getting your pro license with USAT. Was there anything else that really caused you to go down this path with your coaching methodology?
Yeah, I mean, as far as to begin it, it's like beginning with this methodology was entirely just what I was doing as my own athlete. But since starting it, we found that there's a lot of other stuff that supports it, and to get a little bit into the new science, like just the roundabout way of answering this question, it's like, everybody looks at, or we'll just use the bike as an example. Everyone looks at FTP. What's your FTP? What's your FTP? And at the end of the day, what is threshold, right? You can look at heart rate threshold, power threshold, lactate threshold, but on any given day that changes. And why do we choose 60 minutes? Because it's a nice round number, an hour. So what does that mean? Nothing really, because threshold changes every single day. I mean, today you can go out, your threshold could be 300 watts. Tomorrow, you might sleep like shit, wake up, your threshold is 275 or lower or higher if you're feeling good. And, what lactate level your body is able to absorb could be higher or lower day on day, and same with the heart rate, right? And then there's a 4th metric that a lot of people overlook, and it's cortisol, your stress levels. You have a long day at work, you could be rested off of, long rest block come in, you've had work, you got stuff going on in your, family or personal life, and you feel like shit starting your workout. Like you just can't work out. And now again, that cortisol affects your threshold. So it's like those 4 markers together, day on day, that threshold rotates. And someday your threshold is 30 minutes. Someday your threshold's an hour and a half. And it's just, there's no true definition. And so I've personally moved away from that model, and I go more of the critical power model, which is a little bit newer science, and it's equally as ambiguous, but it's a bit more measured. And, it's what in an ideal scenario, power can you sustain forever, right? Which isn't generally true, because your critical power is going to come out higher than your FTP 9 times out of 10. But with that metric, you have something called W prime, which is your kilojoule reserve. And how do you build a kilojoule reserve? Usually sprinters have a higher W prime, but it's easier to dump that out. The W bal is the balance of reserve that you have left. And it's very easy. If you're a sprinter, your threshold's low, your W prime's high, or critical power threshold low, W prime high, and you go up and down and you dump it. So for an ideal scenario, you want to build a huge W prime and have that balance. So that's almost a sprinter mentality, right? But you also need the high critical power. but what comes first? So the back, take a couple steps back of how do you kind of do this thing where you have that large reserve above what your threshold is you work the speed, you get fast. And I believe entirely that the best way to tell a potential in an ultra endurance athlete, an Ironman athlete, even a sprint triathlete, is what can you swim for 200 yards or meters freestyle? How fast? What is your 2-minute bike power? And what can you do an 800 run in? And that is entirely your potential, because I can take anyone. If you can do 600 watts for 2 minutes, I can get your 4-hour power, plenty high. But if your 4-hour power is 200 watts and you have a very, very low 2-minute power, that ceiling is already so low. So the idea of the whole training metric is raise the ceiling before you worry about pushing the floor up. Because if your ceiling's here, your floor is here, you're going to hit. And yeah, you'll get that up, you'll move it a little bit. But if the ceiling is sky high, then you bring the floor up. It's just entirely different direction. So it's raise that ceiling, and if we're going back to this, W prime and critical power model, you raise that W prime really before you start worrying about that critical power. And so that's why all of the base training is speed work. Because if I got an athlete, like ran a half marathon today, PR'd by 5 minutes, fantastic. But, his 800 time, I would be surprised if you could run 800 under 3 minutes. And it's like, okay, so how do we get to that next level that totally puts a ceiling on what he's capable to do? He wants to do sub 20-minute 5K off the bike next year. But that's hard to do if, you can run 305, 255 for a 800. So if you get that 800 to 225, 230, you just mile at 530, 540, and now all of a sudden you're looking at a huge minutes gained just by improving that 800 time by 5, 10, 15 seconds over the course of a 5K, 10K, half marathon, etc. So I think it's a lot easier to take somebody and make them fast and then say go do an Ironman than to have somebody that's like a 14-hour Ironman and work them all the way down. And that's I've said it 10,000 times. That's the gist of all of this. So there's a bit of science, a bit of logic, and a lot of it just works.
Yeah. Have you seen any of these sort of newer training approaches being adopted by I don't know a ton about what the Norwegians are doing or what the higher end pro bike teams are doing, like Emirates. Have you seen sort of some of these training approaches being adopted by those teams, or are there scientific studies that support the methodology that you're really trying to innovate with here?
Yeah, I think as far as scientific studies, there hasn't been. I personally wish I had the resources to do some of it. But it's such a new concept. And we've started to see it over the last couple of years where they'll really add some, VO2 blocks and work that higher end of the engine, whether it's athletes like Magnus Ditlev. I know the Norwegians will do an okay amount of VO2 plus work. I mean, as cyclists, you have to do all of it. Brandon McNulty did a workout earlier this year, and it wasn't quite maximal, but it's, he is the races for UAE Emirates US time trial national champion, and the workout was 5 by 1 minute on 5 minutes rest, 5 by 30 seconds on 5 minutes rest. He did inside of a 4.5 hour bike ride. His minutes were averaged 700, 750, and his 30 seconds averaged around 950 to 1,000. And it's, I don't know what percentage of FTP or critical power or anything that is, but you think about that repeatability as somebody that is specializing in domestiquing for multi-day stage races and a 40K time trial. And it's okay, that he did 7.5 minutes of work a lot of it anaerobic, and it's not really VO2 at that point. It's anaerobic and neuromuscular. And so there's a lot to it. And I'm sure there's a lot of, doctors that have some science-backed reasoning for it. But as a whole, there's not a whole lot of actual studies, because it's a new concept in endurance training, and not necessarily in pure cycling, because you have to be a sprinter and you have to be able to surge. And that's kind of where a lot of it comes from, is just the ability to surge, recover, race. But that's different than marathon running and different than swimming. But even in running, just the idea of hills has always been a thing. And it's not like, oh, run your hill, jog down, or walk down. It is run your hill, fully recover, and then do it again. And there's a little bit more to that than just the neuromuscular adaptation of it. But it's definitely something across elite level triathlon. Martin Van Riel and Jelle Gaines a few years ago were doing a lot of 15, 30, 45-second efforts on the run. And it's being toyed with a lot more, but I doubt we'll see anybody at that level go to a full high intensity only, just because they have so much time. It's at the age group level, and especially the high end age group level, that you never see it. Because if you got 15 hours of time, everyone's going to do 15 hours of aerobic work. And that's really the core group of people that's losing out. Because when you have 30, 40 hours a week to train, you don't need to do any of this to be good. Some VO2 work just to have that capacity, but you don't need to do this type of training, because it's just 40 hours. If you have 40 hours, you can do almost whatever you want, and you will be that level. So that's the gist of it.
Yeah. So, obviously, when you're prioritizing high intensity work, recovery has to be, one of the prime things you're managing with your athletes. Can you walk us through sort of what a typical training week looks like from your coaching perspective? How are you managing recovery? I know you mentioned cortisol levels earlier. Is there any sort of any way that you not regulate that in the athlete, but monitor for that? What does a typical training week look like from your perspective in terms of structure, and then also checking in with athletes to make sure they're actually managing their recovery properly?
Yeah, absolutely. And there's a couple different scenarios, right? Every athlete's different. Every athlete has a different schedule. And every athlete has different needs. So we'll just think about triathlon specific and go from there. And we'll just say, in an ideal scenario, right? An athlete has 10 to 12-ish hours a week to train. Ideal scenario. So I'd like to have 2 days of recovery, and it's not a day off. It's a day of generally recovery, because with this intensity, one of the things that you need is to keep the blood flowing through the muscles. And it could be something that's you're going to ride the bike for an hour. Make it as easy as you can. I put caps on it and not a goal. So instead of saying, oh, let's average 100 BPM, average 125 watts, it is, you are capped at, you will not touch anything over 110 BPM, and you will not touch anything over 150 watts. Go as far under as you want, but just don't touch anything over it. And so I want the body moving, and I want that blood to flow through, because that facilitates the recovery of it. And it's similar. I like to do one of those recovery swims. So Monday is a true recovery day. Swim and bike in an ideal world. Friday we'll have a hard swim. I, in that sense, would totally avoid kick sets. I don't like to do pull. So that's just to a certain level. I don't like to do pull. So the standard athlete I work with won't ever touch paddles and buoys. That's a conversation for a different time.
Yep.
But then again, that would be first in the morning, ideally. you go about your day, and then do that recovery ride at night to, again, facilitate that blood flow and recovery. But the reason I don't like the rest days is, especially with high intensity work, you have to be primed. If you are taking a day off, you will be flat the next day every time. So it's just, that's great, fine, wonderful. But then we have to reevaluate what it looks like when we come back to it, maybe do another day that's not quite as intense, a little bit prime, and then go into it again. So that's why I don't like to take those days off. I don't want people to be flat. It, definitely has a bit more injury risk associated with it.
Yeah.
And then I'll do 2 mini blocks. So Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday will be block 1, Saturday, Sunday's block 2. And the Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday really depends on that particular athlete. So if it's somebody that is decent at running, or needs more bike work, or has an injury history running, I'll do Tuesday run, Wednesday, Thursday bike. And that's, so I want to get the runs out of the way first. And running, since it has that higher risk of injury, and also since it's a little bit more brutal on the body, put that first always. I want it to be executed perfectly. And so, I'm not at this stage. It's like again, all of this high intensity stuff is really off season, and until we really build to that longer race. Like if you're doing sprints and Olympics, we're doing this all the time. Yeah. So we're running perfectly. We are executing, like, it could be something to make you faster at like the 1600, 800 like type speed, maybe dabble a little bit on 5K pace, not always. And it's just a lot of that kind of work. Wednesday will be similar on the bike. So it could be 2 to 5 minute power work. Just we're looking at 45, 30, maybe even 10 to 15 second sprints. Sometimes we can stretch that out to a minute, minute and a half. If we're going more 5 minute power focus, then that is, again, 2 to 3 super long rest on anything. And then Thursday is a bit of a mixed bag. So if they're a weaker runner, but not so prone to injury, we'll do a run. It'll actually be a lower intensity. It might be more threshold focused. Just because they've had 2 hard days, I don't want to extend that injury risk. If we're doing a bike, it will still be a much harder bike, but not quite as brutal as the Wednesday ride. And then for a triathlete, I'm going to do a short brick off of it, because yes, I want the actual run work to be executed well, but in the general statement, a coach that I've not like worked with as athlete coach, but she's business mentor for me, Michelle Lake. She said the bike is only meant to be run off of. And I understand that statement is in, like, whatever you do on the bike, do it with the purpose to run afterwards. But I like to think of it kind of a little bit differently, as you're only meant to run off the bike. As in everything you do on the run, think of it as you have to ride first. So you can do whatever you want on the bike, but you have to run off of it. And you can do whatever you want on the run, but you have to ride first. So just adding those little bricks anywhere, it just creates that adaptation to, I rode, especially if you ride hard. Now I got to run. So it's 10, 15 minutes is all you really need. And I do that Thursday, and then we'll get to the Saturday, Sunday brick. That's going to be, again, weekends are great because you have a lot more time. You don't have to go to work. Weekends also suck because you want to use that time, whether it's family, go somewhere, events, friends, life, right? So that's another, all of this is conversations with the athlete. What is their availability? I did skip the Wednesday swim. I'll come back to it.
Yeah.
Wednesday and Friday swims, I'll come back to those. So Saturday, again, run focus, because run before bike. And that will be a little bit of a longer day. And that's kind of tapping into more 5K pace. And, depending on where we're at in the season, mile pace specific. And the bike will be, again, depending on where we're at in the season, it'll be a longer ride. But I like to, as a general, I like to do a longer ride, and every 20 minutes, a max 10 to 20-second sprint. And I mean, like, that is, we can get into it later, but that is biomechanic essential. So again, do that, whether it's an hour and a half, 2 hours, 4 hours, right? Get off short break. That's your week. And then Wednesday and Thursday, all of the swim stuff is focused on 200 pace or less for the most part until we get to crunch time for specific race training. And, working underwaters, walls, stroke rates, all of the important stuff, power, speed. And you might think, okay, well, I don't need to do underwaters and walls when I'm bracing open water, but having the ability to understand how the water moves, how it works. I mean, hell, I'd like to just meditate in the water for 5 minutes and then move your fingertips or bend your fingers and move your knuckles. You have to be able to feel the water move all around you. I like it if athletes can go feet first down the lane of the pool, right? And so I believe that just because you're an adult onset swimmer, start learning to swim when you're 20s, you can still be really good. You just have to be willing to put in the time. So that's kind of the focus. And the Friday swim will be more of feel the water, right? Get into it, feel the water, lots of drills, a bit of high-paced blast. Wednesday is just going to be sprint your legs off and don't let the form die. So that's a typical week in a dream scenario, but it changes very athlete to athlete. So we can spread it about, add more or less of whatever we need. It just depends. But you have to keep that communication open. Like, I use Training Peaks, as most coaches do. Anything that's workout specific, put in the Training Peaks comments. I read them all the time. And if it's something that's emergent, like, hey, I feel ill, or I got this little, something in my ankle or whatever, somebody will shoot me a text, and I'll, if it's like, okay, a run specific, we could replace it with a bike, take some time off, and just adjust on the fly. And that's a huge, important part. And especially with work, I go through it too. I had a long day at work. I got home an hour late, or it was just really stressful. I need something to change here. And that's fine. Because, if the cortisol levels are higher from your 9 to 5, you'll have less bandwidth for your actual workout. And then it takes longer to recover from. And you don't want to just go through it, kick that can down the road, because it builds exponentially. So you have to evaluate it in the moment. And it's just part of being a human. When you are a full-time athlete, it's a little bit different, because most of your life is centered around training. But otherwise, it's like, how do I fit training around my normal life?
Yeah. So I know, like, just because we know each other, like, I know you coach a lot of different athletes who do like a lot of different race distances. I'm specifically thinking of triathlon. Like, you coach everything from sprint distance through full iron distance, and even beyond that to like extra events. So I guess my question coming off that statement is, I don't think there's a lot of controversy from people when it comes to, high intensity work for distances like maybe sprint distance or Olympic. I feel like a lot of people might get the misconception that you aren't putting in enough endurance volume when it comes to those longer races, like even 70.3 all the way up to an extra race. So, I mean, how much volume are you putting? Like, I know that you don't completely omit zone 2 volume. So, like, sort of what is the breakdown? Because traditionally it's been viewed as sort of like an 80-20 kind of thing. So, like, just in your view, what is the breakdown? And then, like, for long events, long hard events like extra, when are you, I guess, tailoring the programming to be more focused on the specificity for events of that distance and intensity?
Yeah, I think the timeline is 4 months for anything ultra distance, Ironman, X-Tri, etc. 3 months for anything half. And that's like when you kind of, I never neglect VO2 plus, never. But that's when we start looking at some of these and go, okay, definitely need to tap into that threshold that tempo, zone 3, 4, LT1, LT2, whatever you want to call it. But when you think about zone 2 work, you're thinking about, no one trains zone 2 at the top of their zone 2. If you do, you will inevitably dip into that zone 3, or you'll dip into that LT1, and you're just kind of wasting that zone 2 day, right? If you're training zone 2, it's usually mid to lower zone 2. And so let's think about one of the staple workouts I love to do 5 by 2 minutes. Depending on the athlete, 120, 130% of FTP. And FTP is something that I use with the athletes because it's a lot easier to understand. I like to use critical power for myself when I evaluate that. But you can use critical power and kind of evaluate it with the W prime to know what they're capable of doing for that, and then give it to them in terms of FTP. And then I have athletes that do like to have those conversations, athletes that just put it in my training peaks. I don't care. But we'll do 5 by 2 on 4 to 6 minutes rest. And so you execute that 2 minutes, your heart rate is 95% of max, hopefully by the end of it, maybe less at the first couple reps, but let's say your max heart rate is 190, you're at 180 by the end of the rep. You have 5 minutes to recover. The first 4 minutes of it, that heart rate is staying above 120, and like you're riding slowly, and that heart rate is coming down, and then that last minute you might dip 110-ish. Okay, if that's kind of your range, then you're looking at zone 2 is probably around 115 to 130. That whole ride is zone 2 plus some. So zone 2 is never neglected. Zone 2 is there. It's just with something different. So even when we're not doing the volume per se, if you're doing 5 by 2 inside of a 90-minute ride, you're doing 90 minutes of zone 2 or more. So you're still getting that base trained. And as far as the 80-20, that's a fantastic guideline. I like it for people that are not really sure what they're doing, right? But what is easy, what is hard? You can say 80% easy is all zone 1 recovery, or zone 2. You could say anything easy is what's under your critical power, right? So it's kind of subjective, and I think you have to look at each athlete individually and decide, after some time working with them, what do they respond to? What works for them? How much high intensity can they handle? Is there a plateau? Do we need to change something? Do we need to drop that intensity down? Some people can't do that kind of intensity on one particular sport because of injury, whatever. So you change it to something else. And then that's just where it's know your athletes, right? So 80-20 is a great general guideline, but sometimes it has to be 90-10. And I've had athletes that just can't respond to the high intensity, and that's fine. As a coach, you have to adapt to your athletes. Like, they come to you for your methodology, but it's not a one plan fits all. And so some athletes it's that, and some athletes it can be, 65-35, but you're never loading them with more than they can handle and more than they can recover from. It just depends on what their ability is.
Yeah. And I feel like that recovery element is really important to get into. So like when you're working with your athletes, is there, how are you managing their recovery from the higher intensity load? Like, is it just, check-ins at regular intervals, or how are you approaching that?
Yeah. And I mean, we mentioned it earlier with like the dedicated recovery days and recovery sessions. It also comes down to, that athlete has to want to communicate with me. I always advocate, please put notes in training peaks, because I can't chase everyone down via text. It's, I've been really bad about it. I'm trying to be better about it. Like, let's not check my phone while I'm trying to have a night in, and try to time and place it. So again, if I get a text and something a little bit more emergent, like, hey, this is coming up, I need to change a session, that's the one thing. But as far as like, you can kind of tell by this session was really, really hard, I struggled, or I like to review training peaks first thing in the morning. And you can look in there, and especially if you see that trend, let's say we could doing 5x2 and you're at 400, 370, 350, 300, like, okay, something's going on here. And even if they don't say it, or if that heart rate is way, just that kind of exponential spike almost, and you look in there and there's so many markers that you can decide, okay, something's wrong. And then I'll reach out, be like, hey, I noticed this happened last night. What was going on? What are we feeling? And then you get the idea, okay, it's something life related, or it was training related, just too much stress. And that's usually the marker of it, whether it's physical stress, mental, emotional. And then you just reevaluate. So it's like, okay, cool. We're going to bring a second recovery day in, or a third recovery day in this week. We're going to forego tonight's session, or we'll just change it to zone 2, depending on what they need, and kind of reevaluate. So usually I come in as well Thursday and Friday, or especially Friday after the Thursday sessions, essentially, and look at, is there anything alarming? Do we need to change the weekend? So that's another thing as well that I'll do. And most people don't know it. Unless I text and be like, hey, we're doing this and this weekend. But it's like, I'll just make sure things were executed. If sessions are missed, why? Like, that's life. It happens. You're going to miss some sessions, have some red boxes, but is it a lack of motivation, or is there something like, I don't want to say lack of motivation isn't legitimate, but that's easily addressed. Something else that can be, maybe that is something that extends into the weekend. You're starting to feel sick. Okay, cool. Scrap stuff. So it's just keeping that communication open, but also dig into the data, because it tells you everything. Like, that tells us what, it might not tell you why, but it tells you what. So you can at least look at that and not even have to communicate the athlete to know something's up, something needs to be changed.
Yeah. And I know you've had athletes come to you who have traditionally done maybe the more, normal 80-20 split between zone 2 and then threshold or above work. When they come to you and you have time to work with them, like, what performance differences have you observed in athletes that you've been training with this model compared to like just the regular cookie cutter sort of thing?
Yeah. I mean, off the bat, it's all of those, any power PR that's like 5 minutes or less, blown out of the water, mile times, 800 times. And that's not because we're going out, oh, let's 5 minute all out. It's because of just the work that we're doing, and they've never tapped into that before. And so a lot of times, and it depends on your history in the sport, but a lot of the time somebody will come in, okay, we're doing something totally new, and it's excitement, and they respond well to it. And I'll get texts all the time. I just set my fastest 100 freestyle ever. And then 2 days later, I just set another 100 freestyle PR. And then a week later, I set another. And it's like, that's great. Fantastic. And, you love to see that kind of thing. But then, okay, so what are we doing with it? You got to do an Olympic distance triathlon, 1,500 meters. We address that. Like, okay, now we take that 100-meter freestyle. You're swimming so much better. Let's make sure that if that PR is 2 seconds, 1,500, great. That better be 30, right? So, and it obviously it's not a linear 2 seconds in the 100 free means 30 in the 1,500. There's a bit of a different equation to that. And I've built, if you ever looked at the Jack Daniels VO2 calculator, I've built the exact same thing for swimming, regardless of stroke where I am. It is not public. So if you want to use it, I'm working on something, make it usable public. But if you're interested, let me know. Other than that, it's just usually off the first few months, we see a lot of, not always PRs, but a lot of that confidence and speed. and then just the race results end up following it. And one thing I will say is there's often a delay that comes in for that if you're doing a half Ironman, right? And we spend 6 months working on a lot of speed, and then we get to that first half Ironman race, that PR might not be as big as some of those others. Like your 5K PR might jump a minute. Your half Ironman, you'd be like, oh, that's going to jump 10 minutes. And it might not. It might, but it might not. But then that second year, that third year, that's when you see that speed start to transition over. And, you know, if I could tell an athlete what to do, I would say, if you want to do an Ironman, come to me, but you're not racing the Ironman for 5 years. And you get so fast, you know, and it's like, we're just going to make you the fastest person at swim, bike, and run that we can for the first 3 years. And then we'll spend 2 years drawing that speed out. And you never neglect working on it, but you have to spend a lot more time drawing that speed out. Because like I said at the beginning of this, it's like, I would rather somebody put in that time, go race an Ironman, because it's easy to get fast and then take it and add the endurance than it is to, you're a slower endurance athlete, let's make you a faster endurance athlete. It's a different roundabout way of going, but you know, I'm never going to tell an athlete what their race calendar should be. But if I could, that's what I would do.
Yeah. Okay. Getting into like the last sort of 2 questions. How would you respond to people that are of the mindset that high intensity training with this sort of split isn't sustainable, or that it's going to increase the risk of injury too much to a degree that's, you know, going to make it risky for the athletes? Like, what is your response to that?
My response to that is if that is how you feel, then you are either A, coached by someone irresponsible, or B, an irresponsible coach. There should never in anything be an increased risk of injury. If there is, it means you don't know your athlete. You aren't monitoring their situation. You know, if one of my athletes comes to me and they're feeling like something's wrong, the first thing I do is stop everything and figure out what caused it. Why is something wrong? Is it the intensity? Is it volume? Is it life stress added on top of athletic stress causes things to just wear out? And so, you know, that's like, injuries happen to everybody, but to say that, oh, because you focus on high intensity, people are going to get injured more often, that's either, you know, the athlete isn't communicating properly, you know, because I try to keep those lanes open whenever I do intake calls. What is your injury history, and learn those things. So again, some of that is a little bit more, people want to keep that closer to the chest, but you know, the last thing I want is anybody to train through an injury or, you know, aggravate something. I just had an athlete run a marathon today, and they've been dealing with injuries for the last 1.5 years. And, you know, it's something that they've been dealing with off and on their whole life. And so we've had to really accommodate because he wanted to run this marathon. And, you know, if I could say, don't do it, and just, we're going to take this time to recover, you know, I'd be overstepping my boundaries. But we've really worked together to manage everything the best we could. It's constant communication. Today, I feel like I can do, like he would text me today, I feel like I can, you know, probably put 45 minutes of running in, maybe an easy bike. And we go, okay, so what if we did, you know, drop the intensity, some tempo work, warm up on the bike, cool down on the bike, call that your day. And like that training plan was built literally day by day for his whole 3-month marathon block. He would text me in the morning and we'd figure it out. And he'd either execute or be like, hey, I had to stop. And I really empower my athletes to know your limits. There's a difference between pain and injury. If you feel pain, you stop. Text me what you're feeling. Go to a physical therapist if you don't, because I'm not a doctor. I can't diagnose you. And it's just kind of empowering that athlete to speak up and say, hey, something's not right here. Because people have come to me like, my coach before told me I had to do all of this or else I wouldn't be able to reach XYZ goal. And that's the kind of mentality I hate. So if you think that I put my athletes at a higher risk because of the training that I give them, you're probably a coach like that and you should reevaluate what you're doing.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I think, keeping those lines of communication open is really important, especially when you're coaching athletes who might have an injury history or
It's also like they're not, middle school and high school kids trying to get out of something. They're willingly using their own money to do this sport.
Yeah, exactly.
So you want to treat them as such and not tell them, oh, you have to do all of this. Like, the college swim coach that didn't want me to go to the trainer because for my recurring shoulder injuries and, the fact that I couldn't swim, 100 yards probably made it look like I just didn't want to swim. But it's like, I'm an adult. I could just leave the team if I wanted to. I'm having legitimate issues. And maybe when I was a kid, you'd have to ask me questions about that. Like, are you sure? But as an adult, it's like you if you don't want to be here, you won't.
Yeah.
So, treat them like so and really keep that communication open. Make sure that the training they're doing fits their life.
Yeah, absolutely. And how do you see like triathlon coaching evolving over the next 5 to 10 years? Because this is an approach that you see commonly in triathlon coaching. It feels a bit more innovative than your standard process for getting someone from, couch to sprint or getting them from 70.3 to full. So how do you see triathlon coaching evolving over the next 5 to 10 years? And like, how does it feel to be at more of the innovative end of things in terms of coaching?
I mean, I like being at the innovative end of things because people aren't doing this, right? It's new. And so a lot of people disagree with it. A lot of people find it interesting, but, are too, might be not yet willing to jump into it. And so it's a difficult area to be in, but it's really cool. Like I would rather have 12 athletes that are super into it than have a bunch of people on the fence and not really willing to kind of give this a try. But I think in a general state, it's not like overall triathlon coaching isn't going to change much. The elites are going to keep using science that the average athlete doesn't have access to, and the average athlete is going to keep trying to copy it, period. And you can't. Unless you're doing what they're doing, it doesn't work. Like, go ahead, follow the Norwegian method. If you don't lock yourself in a box and live like a monk, it's not going to work for you. You need to train 35 hours a week if all you're doing is that. So, fantastic. That kind of means that the people I coach will pass by in due time, but it's definitely hard to build that grassroots movement, if you will. So I don't see the overall idea of training changing much. So many established coaches are going to stick in their ways. And, if for some reason something else comes up that I find works, then this methodology can change, right? So I'm very open to what else works. So I don't see huge shifts, like, the whole lactate testing movement that started a couple of years ago because of the Norwegians has taken over. But again, it's not any better than what we've been doing with heart rate and power. It's not, going to expedite results. And quite frankly, unless you have years of data to back up what you've been doing, it's not useful data, because how do you know that your body metabolizes lactate at that rate if you don't have a lot of data and showing that it does? So it's difficult because everything is so abstract, like I talked about before. So I see people, there's always going to be a new fad. There's going to be a new thing. if this will never, I don't believe the people doing 45 hours a week, 35 hours a week are ever going to jump into something like this because they're fast enough, right? Like Alex Yee doesn't need to work on speed. He is the fastest runner in triathlon. Maybe a little bit on the bike. It could help him, and in the swim, but the swim, every triathlete could work on their speed, but that's a different conversation. I have a lot of swimming opinions. But it's like, those level athletes don't need this because they are there. This is a method to get you there. And then once you're there, you need to work on getting fit. Don't lose your speed. You still need to work on every now and again, but just get fit and be able to kind of hold that and make it sustainable. So I don't see this overtaking what Blumenfeld and Laidlow and Lucy Charles Barkley and Taylor Nipp are doing. I don't. Parts of it will be incorporated, but it's not going to be the basis of their training. They don't need it. But because of that, it won't take over the age group world, because the age group world will always try to copy what the pros are doing.
Yeah.
And it's just not going to work because, like I said, you don't have the bandwidth and the resources to do it.
Yeah. I mean, I personally don't ever see a world in which the age group athlete is going to be able to replicate what pros are doing, just because, I mean, like you said, a huge limitation of it is just resources. Yeah. Like personally, if I'm doing a track workout, I don't have someone there with a lactate monitor to prick my ear every,
you have to do it yourself,
800,
or the money. Like, how expensive
yeah.
that is? Like, people try to do it. I'm like, where do you get the money to do this, man? I'm not having my athletes buy a $300 lactate monitor and, bunch of strips and like use your HSA money just so I can be your coach, man. Like, that's just it feels so scummy to me.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, I think there are useful takeaways you can get from the ways in which the pros train, but yeah, I agree with you. I don't ever see a world in which we're able to fully replicate that. Maybe with the development of I was going to say with the development of like a continuous lactate monitor, but even then, you had like,
people,
is it that much better than
I can't remember. I haven't favorited in my my Google like browser folder.
Yeah.
But there's some company that's working on developing that. And when it comes to market, unless it's like $1,000, I intend to buy it just to see if there's any means to it. But that's probably 2027 at the earliest it would come to market. But yeah, pros aren't going to train like this. They could benefit from 3 months of off-season training like this, definitely. But nobody is going to look at that and say, yeah, that's what I'm doing with my off-season. So for the average athlete, huge benefits. I mean, just there's so much that you could do if you stopped trying to mimic what the elites are doing. It's even for myself, I've had my pro license for 3 years and I work a full-time job. It's not worth it to me to kind of do that kind of work. So
yeah. Totally understandable too. Okay. Last question. Sort of a surprise one. We both know that probably the biggest area that your typical age grouper struggles with in triathlon tends to be in the pool, in open water, swimming generally. If there was one workout you had to prescribe to the average age grouper to improve their swim times across any distance, but let's say just for the sake of conversation, like up to 70.3 distance, like what would be your coaching prescription for the average age group athlete in the pool?
Perfect. To every age grouper, unless you can swim like sub 10 in the 1,000 yards, sub 9 in the 1,800 meters, I'd never want to see you wear fins, paddle, buoy, period. That's what we're throwing that out there. Or any pool equipment. You can have tennis balls, and we'll get into it later. You can have your goggles if you like cap, and obviously your bathing suit. That is all you ever bring to the pool outside of your water and carbs. No, cat's back.
Hello.
All right. So all three sports, I have a 5-step foundation. One is body position. When you're running, that is your posture. On the bike, it's how you hold yourself. In the swim, it's how you hold yourself in the water. Number 2 is biomechanics. In the pool, it's technique. In the run, it's your cadence, your stride length, where your foot lands, your arm carriage, etc. On the bike, it's, core stability and your pedal stroke cadence and making sure there's no dead spots. Number 3 is speed. Obviously, be fast. Number 4 is efficiency. So if you can hold speed with good biomechanics and proper body position, you are then efficient. So you need the first 3 to then be efficient. And then number 4 is endurance. So don't even worry about endurance until you can master efficiency. So good body position, good biomechanics, incorporate speed. Once you can get those 3 at the same time, efficiency, and then work on endurance. So if I could give, and we're going to just, for the sake of argument, we're going to talk about somebody that got into swimming a little bit later in life, whether it's college, an adult, etc. Warm up 500, 75 free, 25 backstroke, really methodical, slow, think about what you're doing, get the blood flowing. Really kick for 100 to 200, depends. I like kick on your back and streamline, or some body position, kick on your back with your hands at your side, different body position, kick with a board, because a board will force your torso up and your ass down. And now all of a sudden you're kicking through the water like this. So if you use a board, you try to get your body level. Great. And now we'll do 12 to 16 25s of drills. And it depends on where that swimmer is in their journey. But one of my personal favorite drills is swimming with a tennis ball. Because everybody, and the worst part about paddles, is you try to react to the water with your hand, how it feels on your hand. If you use a tennis ball, now all of a sudden you lose that. You have to react to the water on your forearm. So paddle accentuates the hand feeling. And you can come into the water like this, but you feel it on your hand. But all of a sudden you close up your hand and there is no water moving. So now you got to put your elbow up here when you swim with a tennis ball, and it forces your fist to be closed, because if you just do fists, people start to creep like this, and now all of a sudden they're feeling it on the hand again. That's one of my favorite drills. Something like where you want to be able to feel that your butt is out of the water. There's a few different drills to work on for that. I won't get into all the details, but when you're swimming, you should be able to feel that part of your back and your butt are out of the water. Another thing with kicking is a lot of people like to kick long and slow, kind of never want to be outside of a foot width of your other foot. Keep it short and choppy. You're a triathlete. Kick is important for stability, not super important for actual moving through the water, but you still want to work on it enough that you're confident with those movement patterns. So get that, and then we'll do a few 50s, depending on what the set is. It could be build, it could be blast, and then do 100 easy. And then the actual set itself, if I could give any singular set, let me look through some real quick.
Let's see what we've got in the backlog.
I know what I want to say, but I'm just trying to decide if I want to do it. Okay. All right. This is this is what I was looking for here. It is you do 20, not 25, you do 20. So I want you to start under the flags, 5 meters from the wall, and kind of start forward and just your body on top of the water, but not moving forward. And then from there, you swim as fast as you can to the other end. And it should be 20 meters of full acceleration. And what this is going to do is it's going to teach you to actually generate power and forward momentum without using the wall. And you need to have proper, body position and biomechanics, or else you won't be able to continue the acceleration all the way to the wall. And I mean, we'll do 5 to 10 of those, a full either 25 recovery or full 50 recovery, and then give me whatever you can do for a 50 all out plus 2 minutes. So let's say you can do a 50 in 30 seconds. 10 50s on 2:30 interval all out. If you're allowed to use the blocks, use the blocks. And then do 300, 400, 500 cool down and get out. But swimming is different than cycling or running because it is so power dependent and so technique dependent. If you can execute that perfectly, you can do the 2100 yards that a half Ironman is without issue. Obviously, there is some aerobic, but you get so much aerobic work elsewhere. And if we add other swims in, you'll get that. But if I could give any triathlete a workout, that would be the workout. And a lot of times you get, oh, but that's not enough volume. It's not about the volume, it's about the work.
Yeah, I feel that, especially for swimming, where so much of it is technique based. It's like I know personally for myself, I get way more out of just working on technique than I do swim volume.
Yeah.
Technique, and then also, training that higher end of intensity. But yeah, okay. Well, this has been insightful.
Yes. I'm glad. I could speak for hours on some of these, but I think, to spare the listener, I kept it brief, as brief as I could.